Welcome to Becoming an Advocate for Social Justice in Voice and Spirit with Episcopal Diocese of Washington Missioner for Equity and Justice, Hazel Monae. This event is presented by the Gaithersburg Episcopal Church of the Ascension Equity and Justice Committee. We have a very strong turnout tonight, which is wonderful to see. This presentation is dedicated to you. Your presence here demonstrates your concern for all matters that pertain to social justice and equity. And in doing so, you show the strength of your spirit by speaking up in advocacy of those issues vital to your faith and your family, friends, and community. Our goal tonight is to provide you with tools, practical advice, and maybe a bit of motivation. Now, a few introductions. Hazel Monae is the Episcopal Diocese of Washington's Missioner for Equity and Justice. She joined EDAL in March 2021, having previously served at the Episcopal City Mission in Boston. At EDAL, she has reinvigorated critical programs such as the prison ministry team, the sanctuary ministry that supports undocumented siblings, and the reparations task force, which seeks to uncover the truth about our past and repair the breach in our present. I'd also like to recognize L'Oreal, chair of Ascension's Equity and Justice Committee, and is kind of our coach, always urging us on from the sidelines. Danielle Allen is our producer this evening. She's also Ascension's junior warden. Reverend Beth O'Callahan has been instrumental in putting this event together. She's rector of the St. Nicholas Episcopal Church in Germantown, and she's also the dean of the North Montgomery County region of EDAL, which includes 8 up-county churches. I'm Ed Armstrong, your moderator and a member of Ascension's Vestry and Equity and Justice Committee. Before we get underway and turn it over to Hazel, we'd like to now turn to the Reverend Javier Garcia Ocampo, rector of the Episcopal Church of the Ascension in Gaithersburg, for our opening prayer. Padre?
Thank you, Ed. Let us pray. Ever-present God, you called us to be in relationship with one another and promised to dwell wherever 2 or 3 are gathered. In our community, we are many different people. We come from many different places and have many different cultures. Open our hearts that we may be bold in finding the riches of inclusion and the treasures of diversity among us. We also want to pray for peace in the world, that you can touch the hearts of all the people looking for power by killing other human beings, so they may be filled with love for one another and all your creation. We pray in faith. Amen.
Thank you, Padre. Now, a few housekeeping matters. Please put your questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. I spoke with Hazel a little while ago, and she has prepared a wonderful bunch of material for us. So we'll try to keep it moving and lively as we can. But which leads me to this. Please know that we view this event as an opening dialogue. We'll be following up with some useful information, a great brochure from the Episcopal Church entitled From the Pew to the Public Square, as well as Hazel's slides. So we'll be providing all that, and she's put together some other documents and resources for you that I'm sure she will explain right now. And now I'd like to welcome Hazel Monae. Please explain the importance of advocacy in our spiritual lives and in the work of the church, and tell us about the work you do to support all of us in that. Hazel?
Wow, thanks, Ed. I'm so grateful for that introduction. And for the invitation to return to this space. Thank you to Lori, thank you to Javier, to Beth, and all of the folks gathered here. I'm so excited to continue this awesome relationship with folks in North Montgomery County. Hazel Monae, I use she, her pronouns, and as of 2 days ago, I've made officially 1 year as the Missioner for Equity and Justice, and I continue to be so grateful to God and to give me this space to grow and to walk alongside this diocese. So thank you for having me. Just a real quick thing in terms of how we're going to orient today. I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to share some information. I'm gonna share some links. It's gonna be a lot of sharing, y'all. And I just want to preface by saying, it's been hard to disseminate a legislative process and advocacy understanding and to, winnow it down in years and years of work, right? And so I just say that to say, we're going to offer grace in this space. This is not the space to become a legislative expert or understand advocacy on every level you could ever understand it. I know y'all knew that. It's always helpful to say it so that you can relieve yourself of any stress or anxiety you might have of okay, I've got to write it down. I've got to get it together. This is being recorded. The slides will be shared. Links will be shared. So I invite you to just be present to what's happening in your own body and spirit as you hear. The other thing that's important is I don't know everyone on the screen, and maybe one day that'll change. And so I don't presume to know where you're entering this conversation, your own level of advocacy, engagement, or desire for particular bills or any of those things. I'm speaking as Hazel, Equity and Justice Missioner, understanding there's various ways that we're coming to this conversation. The last thing, and it's a note of gratitude. It is beautiful knowing that this space is a collaborative space, that when I think about advocacy, when I think about justice, it is relational. It is deeply rooted in collaboration and shared resources, shared values. And so it's really beautiful to see folks from various parts of the county. I often think about the power that, yes, one congregation might have to meet with an elected official, for example, and that elected official be like, wow, this congregation in Ascension is so active. And that would be beautiful. And then the deeper power and impact that 2 and 3 and all congregations within this region gathering together, not just in terms of signatures, but in mind, body, and spirit, the impact that will have. So I'm really excited for being in spaces where collaboration is prioritized. I'm going to share my screen, which will mean that seeing the chat might be a little bit challenging. And so I've invited Ed to tell me to hush up and answer a question or two. Okay. Something for folks who don't know me, I'm just down to earth. I'm California to the core. I've got California sensibilities. I was raised by a parent from Alabama and a parent from Jamaica. So I'm just chilling. I'm always just chilling. So I just want you to know, I don't come as an expert in anything. I come as a friend. I come as a companion on this journey. So I will treat you as such, and I want you to treat me as such. So tell me about myself. All right. So let's do this. We're going to dive in and becoming an advocate for social justice and voice and spirit. Please let me know that you can see what is on my screen. Great. So just a few things. I'm hopeful that by the end of this time together, we'll just have a quick understanding of how to do this. What does it mean to be an advocate? Some nuts and bolts on where to kind of plug in. We'll get a chance to try in real time, by the way, a little bit of our own advocacy. So I hope y'all are ready to do some of that and provide some deeper understanding of the ways that power and privilege play into this conversation on advocacy and how we can leverage both of those to pursue social justice. And lastly, wanting to continue to be steeped in our tradition, our religious and spiritual traditions, as they inform our advocacy work. Our baptismal covenant alone is this is it, the work for justice and peace. And so we're here. We're going to start with a note around understanding power and privilege around advocacy. Part of the beauty of being in a space like this is that we can be fortified to sort of ask questions we haven't asked before, think about concepts from a different vantage point. And so I hope that this space can offer that. So when we talk about power and privilege and the conversation on advocacy, I think a lot about this quote that is about to appear on your screen from our Aboriginal activist. It says, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." I love this quote as it pertains to our conversation on advocacy because it says two things. One, that this is our work. And advocacy by definition, like if you look it up in Webster's, it sort of talks about a little bit as like someone else's work. We're doing something on behalf of other people. And in a lot of ways that is true. There's been a lot of times where I've signed a petition, I've reached out to an elected official on an issue that is not necessarily super connected to me, signing bills right now and advocating for the full liberation and the full acknowledgement of humanity for our trans siblings. I am not trans, but I believe in liberation. I believe in wholeness and fullness and abundance. So I'm gonna be in step. And so when I think about this quote, I don't have to be aligned, right, in experience or in life, but I wanna be aligned in a value of liberation and a value of freedom. So this quote really speaks to that for me. Because we're thinking about advocacy, finding that sweet spot, right, between what the world says is about advocacy, which is giving voice to the voiceless, which is I want to trouble that statement that there are no voiceless people. There are people whose voices have not been heard. And so part of our advocacy work is being able to center those whose voices have not been heard. So if you've come to let people hear your voice, then take a pause, ask Jesus about it, and come back so that we can talk about whose voices have not been heard. So that brings us to this conversation around power. Like power is really important in this space because this is you are a group of Christians, which has power in this society. You are folks who may be educated, folks who may be in positions of power, folks who may be white, folks who may be straight and male, all the things, all of the identity markers that bring power and privilege in our society. I love playing around with this image here on the screen, power, the ability to get what you want. And so you see, I don't know if you can see because it's kind of small actually on my screen, but it's a small little clip that says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And in the picture, there's a bird, a monkey, a penguin, an elephant, a fish, a seal, and a dog. And quickly, you begin to see like, okay, some of these folks are not going to be able to climb that tree for all the reasons. And so I think, well, okay, the monkey could, through its power as, you know, being able to like literally have the ability to do what is being asked, to just climb up the tree and be like, well, I climbed up the tree, I'm good over here, right? We can name lots of places in our society where people are like, well, I did it, I'm good, my people are good, I don't need to do anything. And part of the conversation of identifying the privilege to have that, like to say that in our advocacy work is to maybe ask one of two questions or maybe more. One question could be from a person who has power and privilege, maybe not just immediately climbing the tree, maybe asking, I wonder how other people are gonna get up this tree. That elephant, it may not be able to make it up this tree. I don't know if I'm going to climb the tree unless other people can climb the tree. So maybe that's one approach through advocacy. Another thing that the monkey might do to advocate for all of those folks, all those animals who are not able to climb the tree, is to say, I'm going to climb the tree and I'm going to let down some branches so others can climb the tree. Or I'm going to, if the monkey's strong enough, chop down some pieces so others can be a part of this. You see where I'm going. So when we're talking about advocacy as it pertains to having power and privilege in these conversations, it is to use the power well, to use the privilege well in whatever direction you want to go. Any questions so far? I won't be able to see them, so just come off mute because. Okay. So I want to invite you to interact with me a little bit in the chat in a moment. So when I think about social change, when I think about justice and like the whole pursuit, it is work, right? And I think sometimes folks can get lost in like I've got to do this and I've got to, learn these things and I've got to be different. And of course, we must change, like our systems must change. And that is a doing, right? And it's important. But I love to start with dreaming. Walter Brueggemann talks about prophetic imagination as sort of the prophets being able to imagine and dream up something that was beyond what they could see, what they had access to. And that is the gift that we have as Christians. It is a large part of the Episcopal tradition to be able to draw on the many gifts to be able to say, Spirit is calling us to another way of being. I grew up in the Baptist tradition, and sometimes, I don't know if folks in the Episcopal Church have this experience, but folks would ask like, oh, what prompted you to say that thing? What prompted you to do that? And I would be like, I have no answer but God. The Holy Spirit did something that I did not necessarily have control over, and I thank God, right? So how do we begin to leverage our own gifts, our own spiritual gifts, as we think about dreaming? What does it mean to dream and be prophetic in that dreaming? So I want you to do two things. We've talked about power and privilege, and maybe you practice identifying where you have power and privilege. Maybe this is your first time, totally fine, either way. But I want to do two things. One is in the chat, 3 words that describe your dream society. So we're dreaming, and dreaming is about having vision beyond what we can see, remember? And so freedom, abundance, joy comes to my mind when I think of my dream society. And the second question that I want you to answer in the chat is, what privileges, skills, and qualities do you have? Do you possess that you can use to achieve this dream? So I'll say, even though I hold multiple marginalized identities as a Black queer woman, I am overly educated. That's what I talk about, overly educated. I have not only more financial resources than I know to do with, but I have the potential to gain more financial resources, right, than I know to do with. So having a socioeconomic status that allows me into spaces that others are not. Right? These are privileges I have. I'm Christian. That's a privilege in this society. And so to be able to name where are our privileges that we want to leverage to live into this dream world. So what's the dream, and what are your privileges and skills that you want to bring into that dream into fruition? So I can now see the chat. I've figured that out. Look at me. And I would love to just sort of hear from y'all real quick in the chat. Ed is imagining the dream society of equality and freedom, and that it's peaceful. Lori, heaven on earth. Amy says, dignity of every human being, truly lived, joyful, caring. And as you hear and read from your peers and colleagues, I just invite you to sort of locate where anything in your body and your spirit that's coming up. What does it feel like to be thinking of this dream world together that is peaceful, that is equitable, that is achieving beloved community that has abundance, where justice lives, where love and care thrive? And begin to think, in this dream world, what gifts am I bringing? What privileges am I using well? What power am I using well to make sure that love reigns supreme, that justice reigns supreme, that peace is felt by all, that we all have abundance, and that everyone is respected? What do you want to bring to that society? Maybe if you are a person who identifies as male, maybe you want to bring some softness because toxic masculinity has just been running wild. Maybe you want to bring softness. Maybe you want to bring openness and vulnerability. If you are a person who is fully able-bodied, maybe you want to bring strength where folks are not able to do certain things. So I know, I imagine that question, this might be the first time you're being asked that question. What privileges do I have and I want to bring to this dream world? What is this? And even if you're not able to access that at this moment, that is 1000% fine. Just an invitation, however, to continue to think about how we use our power. Thank you, Beth. You want to use your voice, your vocation, as a co-creator, as a disciple of Jesus, all of these beautiful things, to bring that into the space, to listen, to practice true allyship. I love this voice amplification. Voices that have not been heard, but we want to bring to the fore. I'm grateful for y'all's participation. I love that little activity because I think it just helps us ground. I think often advocacy is like, there are the nuts and bolts, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts. But I think we want to remember that we are humans in this work. We have our thoughts and our feelings and our spirituality that we want to continue to bring in and leverage. Having power and having privilege doesn't need to be the worst thing in the world. It is about how you use it. There's a way that our society has given power based on particular metrics. And then there's a way that we can use our power and use it well. So keep that in mind as we begin, as we continue our conversation. I want to introduce sort of two quotes that really, I think they've been sitting with me for a long, long time. I often use them in other spaces. But the first one on the screen is from Gloria Anzaldúa. Says, knowledge makes me more aware. It makes me more conscious. Knowing is painful because after it happens, I can't stay in the same place and be comfortable. I am no longer the same person I was before. I remember I entered into justice work as a young person in the wake of the Rodney King incidents in California. And I remember very vividly, right? Like my before and after moment. I was like, just this like really happy-go-lucky kid, and like everything was just like, ah. And then I, got a sense of what the world maybe had in store for me. And I remember watching a Disney movie very soon thereafter and being like, just ripping it to shreds. I'm like, that's the patriarchy, that's a racism. Like I just could not unhear and unsee all that had been given to me through this on the web. Siri is a busybody, excuse her. Through being introduced to the injustices of the world. And so the invitation isn't to go sort of like tear apart every Disney movie ever. I did finally move away from that, but it is to this quote say, once you learn, once you know, please don't turn away. Please respond. The bottom gets a little bit at the quote from the beginning of our time. Audre Lorde says, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. And so maybe when we're talking about advocacy, maybe these are not issues that are like your particular issues, but maybe you understand what it feels like to fight for your right to exist. Maybe you feel, what it feels like to feel isolated, to feel left out, whatever the feeling is, whatever the value. I want the value of liberation. I want the value of abundance and thriving and joy. Those are the things that bring us to advocacy. We're not going to have the same experience as every person in the world, right? Thank God for that. But we might be able to align in our advocacy work around the shared value. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about types of advocacy. And then we're going to focus in on two particular, one very much, and then a second kind of secondary. So when we talk about advocacy, there's a lot. You might have heard about personal advocacy or actions, which is, folks could protest, donating money, giving your time and labor, writing and emailing elected officials, prayer, Episcopalians. I don't know, do Episcopalians like love prayer? Because I'm still learning about that. Like prayer is so powerful. And for me, it changes things, and not just things, it changes me. And how I orient to the world. And so to be able to know that when we're talking about advocacy, this is not separate from what it means to show up in this world as a Christian, as an Episcopalian, as a follower of Jesus. Other types of advocacy, community organizing, grassroots organizing, lobbying, all types of things. We do love prayer if it's in the prayer book, yes. Oh, well, that's okay. I will say very quickly, quick aside, I was leading some worship and something like right in the middle of it had happened that was really jolting. And I was so grateful to the BCP and its 1,001 pages that I could find a prayer for the most random things. Like, I'm going to pray for this water bottle and this cat and this flower and this, I don't know. It's like beautiful though, that you have access to this. I come from a tradition of extemporaneous prayer, where the Spirit puts on your heart things that God wants at this moment. But anywho, I digress. But bringing your prayer life, bringing your spiritual practices into your advocacy. The important thing is when we're talking, whatever level of advocacy you're engaging in, The goal is to make sure that the type of advocacy that you're engaging in, like the method matches. And so if you are saying, I want to do community organizing as my advocacy, engagement, and I'm going to donate money. Donating money is a beautiful thing. We appreciate it. The movement needs funding, of course. That is not the input for a grassroots organizing initiative. Y'all see what I'm saying? The way I like to talk about it is every fire cannot be put out with water. Some need some baking soda if it's an oil fire. Sometimes I cook and get a little carried away and things get a little bubbly and I'm like, let me immediately want to throw the water on and I'm like, oh, that's oil. And so really making sure that your response matches the level, the type of advocacy you're working on. So today we're going to focus on legislative advocacy, because that is one that in our society is essential because of how our policies are made, because of how those systems are enacted on individuals and institutions and vice versa. Understanding legislative advocacy as a place of intervention in all of our work feels really important. So we're about to do something that I'm like, oh man, this is so technical, but I hope that it's helpful. And I'm going to make a lot of, I'm going to preface a lot by saying, this is non-exhaustive. These are my little thoughts from my 7:30 brain. And so bear with me, that I wanted to give sort of a little bit of an overview and key concepts around legislative advocacy work. And then what we're going to do is get a chance to try on advocacy in real time. And there are levels. So we're not going to go march down at the State House. We're not going to do that level of advocacy tonight. We'll do some things that are a little more tangible. And I'll say more about that in a bit. But right now, I want you to take a deep breath. And I want to take a deep breath and get some water. And then we'll begin our conversation on advocacy. So you heard me mention different types of advocacy. This one, legislative advocacy, specifically legislative advocacy on a statewide level. That's what we're looking at, the state and national level, but really it depends on what bill, right? That all is its own thing. But I want to give you sort of a little bit of information about the structure that you're going to be doing advocacy in. So that's what we're doing. So key things to note for legislative advocacy work. These are just 3 points. They're not, again, not everything, but the first one is the most important work is done before the session. That is before the session and between votes. So I'm going to say a little bit more about where those things happen. So when the legislators are convening, these are the times for folks to be saying, excuse me, this bill doesn't respond to how we want to exist in the world, or we want to make sure that these values are highlighted. Those are the spaces that we want to be plugging in, educating ourselves, educating stakeholders, building relationships, doing work. And so when we're talking about advocacy, it is ongoing. So that first one says, get connected, get in there. The second thing to note is that communicating with the lawmakers and their staff, it has to be ongoing. I can't tell you the amount of times they're like, yes, we got that. We got the bill passed. Senator McGee said yes. And then there's no more follow-up. There's no more accountability. And then year after year, it's like, wow, he stopped being an advocate for us, and because we stopped staying connected. And so the process, the legislative process moves very quickly. And so you want to stay connected while the process is happening, but even beyond. The third thing to note is that democracy rewards those who show up. So you can often tell through different bills and that get passed who was vocal, who was in someone's ear, who was, connecting others on these issues. And so that last one is connect with others, build relationships, build networks, reach out to other folks who you may not have at the top of your mind, but will be really important to keep in the conversation as the work moves forward. So I'm going to walk through an overview of the legislative process. Please, hopefully don't be intimidated by this. Sometimes I'm intimidated by it, but all you need to know is there's the House and the Senate, a bill comes in, and then there's some like chatter, some voting, some chatter, some voting, and then it goes and gets voted on for real, for real. That's essentially what this thing on your screen says. And so essentially the first step is the bill is introduced. There are 3 readings and 3 votes on a bill. That's how it works. So the bill is introduced, committees like chatter holds a hearing and says, this is all right. We want to recommend that we pass it. We can pass it with an amendment. We don't want to pass it, or we want to table it. Those are the options. Then they send it on. If they pass it, they pass to the next group and they read. And this group is made up of other lawmakers. They offer amendments, and then there's a vote. So it's read and vote, read and vote. That's the pattern 3 times. In some states, like New Jersey, for example, some legislators, the bills are scheduled to move like simultaneously. So House and Senate will be going at the same time to kind of cut down on kind of the cross ridiculousness. It just depends state by state, but to reconcile the differences between the groups. Then once there's some clarity, once both chambers, the House and Senate, agree on a final language, whatever that is for that particular bill, that new version with all the amendments, all of those things, and as they get passed, it goes up to governor or whomever, and that at that point gets approved or vetoed. Again, all you need to know is 3 readings and 3 votes. Boom. This is important in understanding where advocacy matters most. Advocacy is going to matter the entire time, but strategically, what you want to do is get advocacy on, I wish I had a pointer, before the bill is introduced. So this might mean like if you are like already on it, maybe you are a part of a group that is introducing the bill, that is pushing to make that happen perhaps. But during the points where you see that it says readings and not the voting space, the reading and deliberating space is where you want to chime in. And you can chime in so many ways. The most popular ways are emails and phone calls to your elected officials, letting them know how you would like them to vote on this particular issue. Now, remember the last thing I said on the previous slide was democracy rewards those who show up. So if you have a bill coming up and say it's on access to great education, whatever it is, and maybe everyone who's like really vocal and showing up is like, you know what, those kids over there don't deserve an education. I want to write my elected official like heck. I'm gonna get all my friends, I'm gonna get my family members to write our elected official and say, don't vote on that. And that might happen, right? That does happen, not might, that does happen. And so the invitation again is to continue to be persistent, to invite others into that space to chime in before voting, because they're gonna vote based on information that they're getting, right? And so if you're inundating them with new data or new information that might change how they walked in, or even if you have a legislator who's like super gung-ho, hey, I'm so grateful that you're really engaged and want to support this bill. Can you get your colleague to support this bill? And here's why we think you should do that. So just finding places to intervene. And I'm going to use air quotes, it's pretty simple once you know what's possible. And we'll do that in a second. The last thing before we give it a try is about stakeholders. Really important to understand in the process that I'm not going to read everything on here, and I also realize it's showing up real spotty, but essentially you want to understand like who's in control in terms of the party, what are the influences, both internal and external, and then what's happening in terms of the election. So specifically to that last piece around the elections and terms, if you're in a year of an election, it's typically harder to get more controversial bills passed or bills with kind of a fiscal note attached to it. And then understanding term limits would be helpful. So if you have an elected official who's like super just like on your team and you see that, oh man, this might be a multi-year effort on this particular legislation, and you might learn, oh, this person is up for re-election next year, that might help you, that might help inform how robust your advocacy is, just to make sure that you get your desires before that person may or may not be voted out or move on. And then the last thing in terms of stakeholders is it's important to understand that the stakeholders are not just the important folks, are not just the folks who are voting on the bill. It's the folks who have their ear. So in a lot of cases, you all know the media, the district attorneys, if we're talking about the criminal justice system, police chiefs and sheriffs, judges, do you have relationships? Are you connected with other folks as a part of that larger system who might be in the back room informing decisions? Think about it in congregations. Maybe you feel like, man, I have not been able to get Javier's ear for some reason, but you know that you have a really strong relationship with Ed, and Ed has Javier's ear. How do you leverage that relationship? And I'm going to tell you, it sounds like triangulating, and it is. And so, and when we talk about like political and legislative advocacy for the sake of liberation for all people, triangulate, like just go build the relationships that you need to be able to move those elected officials to vote on things that matter about our lives. Any questions about big things, maybe not so specific about like, when does the legislators meet? Not that you can't ask that question, but I don't know if that's necessary for our conversation. But any questions or things that are coming up before we take a practice on how to engage an elected official through legislative advocacy? Do you see any questions or see people raising
No,
hands?
we're getting mostly comments, Hazel. I actually have a question.
For sure.
Well, it's a question in the form of a statement that in this era, with the voter suppression bills, like out of places like Texas, Georgia, it is so critical to think that not in terms of just a wish list, but there's stuff out there you want to stop too. And so that of course requires advocacy. There's a lot of people that have their mind set, want to vote one way or the other, but it's the fence sitters. And when you can identify somebody who is having an honest deliberation of whether they're going to vote for or against something, boy, that's critical.
It
Get
is
to those people.
very critical. I love that. Like there's this barometer in the justice world that's, and I'm sure it's everywhere, but it's like, we're not necessarily gonna put all our energy into, you know, converting the person who's like direct, like deep opposition. Like our job is that middle spot. The folks who are like, I don't have enough information to make a decision, or I'm kind of apathetic, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of folks in that middle ground that can be, so both individuals who can, who are not elected officials, and also your elected officials who are waiting to hear from their constituents on how they should vote. Let me see if techniques can overcome the facts and other groups with big money in the ear of lawmakers. People power. I mean, it is that, to your question. I think Hollis,
Yeah.
Hollis, people, relationships. I mean, I think it sounds really, sometimes when I say it, I'm like, people have more power than all the money. And maybe our society doesn't always like affirm that. In community organizing, however, it is true, because there might be PACs that have big money, but people gather together with their resources makes a huge difference. This is not a money example, but this makes me think of like the Montgomery bus boycotts, that at the end of the day, you know, the community, the white folks thought, oh, these black folks don't mean anything to us. They don't have any power and they don't have to ride this bus, whatever. And then they realize, wow, they're like all of our money. They literally are the ones that are paying for us to run this bus system. Dang, we need them, right? And so really forcing folks' hand, and that requires us to put our money in different areas. I'm trying like everything I can to stop shopping at Amazon. It is challenging, right? Like these entities that kind of require us to participate in them, and how do we build the relationships and community to then sort of counteract that? Diane asked, can local officials be most influential at the state level? We have good relationships with our commissioners. Absolutely. So we're talking about advocacy within a legislative situation. So I was speaking very specifically about like the state and national level. But if you remember, I said like external influences, those are folks who are maybe they're not in the House, but they are, I mean, I can't tell you, in the town I grew up in, the school board is like the most influential, powerful body over and above the senator. I'm like, good luck. And so really being able to keep a finger on the pulse, that is another part of advocacy we don't have time for today. It requires a lot of research, a lot of political education, a lot of understanding the process. And so maybe you as an individual are like, that's not my ministry, but I want to be a part of an organization for whom that is their, the ministry. And so, you can join faith-rooted community organizing initiatives like WIN and or Samaritan Ministries that are doing that level of work. You can subscribe to the Episcopal, the wider church's public policy network, which I think maybe twice a day I get a new opportunity to act, right? And so if you don't have all the time in the world, right? Like I was a community organizer, I had nothing, that was my whole life, to sit, read about legislation. Maybe that's not your ministry, that's okay. But being able to be and around folks for whom that is the case, so that you can be more informed in the decisions that you make around your advocacy, awesome. Other question, how is advocacy to a lawmaker different from advocacy to an executive to uphold laws and not ignore laws? I'm not understanding the question. How is advocacy to a lawmaker different from advocacy to an executive to uphold laws? Is Hollis, I'm not sure where you are. I don't know, maybe you're not able to come off of mute, maybe. Can you add?
I think she might be talking about, Hollis, please let me know if I'm wrong here, but a good example might be policing.
Thanks for the unmute. Yeah, I think, oftentimes good laws are passed, enacted, and sitting there, and executives in the past, in my lifetime, have, refused to put them into play, withdrawn them, or tried to take money away from them so they were not effective, put executive branch people under them so that those laws won't be enforced or used to do what they're supposed to do. I mean, this is in environment and also in social justice issues. They just put a person there who won't do it, even if the law is sitting there. And I was wondering if there's, a difference in the techniques of advocacy for that group, as opposed to getting someone to pass the law to begin with.
Right. So I think that's a great question. Thanks for clarifying. This is really in line with the point I made around the continual engagement. And so once a bill is passed, like you said, it can sit forever, like can do nothing. And in fact, this is no offense to the Episcopal Church. I know there's a lot of resolutions that were like, we passed this resolution. And I'm like, what did y'all do with it? Right? Like, so part of it is the accountability is gotta be there. The challenge, however, is that there's a little, because the political cycle is so fast, and if you can miss anything, right? Like if you blink, you've missed it. And so part of it is making sure that there are stopgaps for accountability placed in there. So one of the things that someone on my team, her whole job, once we got a yes from an elected official, once a bill was passed, any of those things, her whole job was to create a strategy for continued engagement, for accountability. And that means that we've got to be doing more than going to the polls once or twice, a year or every 2 years or whatever. We've got to, be proactive or maybe responsive over and above reactive. Often we sort of like surprise me, we've got to show up and rally our folks to get out to go to a protest, when maybe if there was a strategy around, okay, we know that this bill has been passed, here's our strategy for what implementation looks like. And like, you work for me, elected official, and here's what we need you to do. And being able to really own that. And I know that's very challenging if you're not like in the world, but like, you work for me. And once I got clear about that, not in like a power hungry way, but like I want to make sure you use your power well. to the benefit of those on the margins and for all people. And so it's a little bit more strategy of engagement in that way. I want to take more questions, and I want us to leave today with some practice. So can I move forward?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the really popular and most accessible ways to connect with an elected official is writing a letter. I'm going to share, I think I'm going to share my screen. So I won't share. So this link will be given to you, but if you are the person who wants to write things down, you can. So there's a few tips for writing letters to elected officials. They, if you can imagine, get a lot. And that's actually a really beautiful thing. So it isn't to say they get a lot, so it doesn't matter. That actually matters. Because if an elected official is not hearing from the constituency, they're like, well, I'm not going to care about whether we get a garden in this community. My community doesn't care about the garden, right? And so really making sure that we understand that we can create the agenda as much as possible. That's like got a lot of caveats because the political system is the political system. Y'all know. And so writing a letter is very helpful, even if that person ever writes you back, okay? And so the flow, and I'm going to show you an example in a bit. Salutation, hello, honorable person or senator who's a what, their address, that all of these things can be found online. You can go up, find my legislator, Maryland, and then you'll find that I forget her first name, something Lewis is one of yours. And then you can sort of start the conversation with a kind of a statement of purpose. Why are you writing this letter? Opening with sort of like real, like, this is why I'm here. It's usually the first line that they're going to read. So you want it to be really like, I'm writing in favor of this bill. If you are, it's this bill by this author around this topic. So we're going to use an example in a second. So you're going to have your first opening sentence. And then you're going to kind of demonstrate like why that particular thing is important. For some people, you might include some research that you have or links to different things. I like to do that. Let folks know that I'm on it. I'm not gonna just like let you get away with it. I know some things. I want to add an NPR article, which is one of my favorite things to do. But you want to keep it brief. And then you want to say a little bit about who you are. Why does this person need to listen to you? I'm a constituent in your region is the best sentence you can write. I live, and then at the end, I'll say, you're going to write your address so they can verify that you are a constituent in the region. You might, as a person of faith, state, I'm a person of faith, a member of such and such congregation. We believe X, Y, and Z about the inherent dignity and humanity of all peoples. You might draw on their own humanity. 2 years ago, you spoke at the Human Rights Campaign and shared your commitment to this. And help, draw it out, get the guilt trip them. I love a guilt trip, but really draw out your own humanity, who you are, and invite them into their own humanity. And then the last thing you want to do is make the request. Will you vote yes, no, whatever the thing is that's coming up on this particular bill? And then you sign your name and your address. I'm going to share my screen to show you an example. When I was living in Massachusetts, during the beginning of the pandemic, I used this as an did I share? Can you see this, the words on the screen? So it says, dear, this is just an example, dear so and such, my name is actually Hazel, not name, and I'm a resident in your district. I've lived here, and I might say a little bit, I've lived here X amount of years. This is what I love about living here, all of those things. I'm writing in support of an act to guarantee housing stability during the COVID-19 emergency and recovery, filed in the House as, and then you will list the particular, that's the most important thing is you want to list the bill you're talking about so they can go and search very quickly. So we were talking about 2 bills that were specific to housing stability. And then I raised some issues. The coronavirus has devastated communities. It's taking a disproportionate toll. I included guess what? An NPR article. That one is an NPR article. Well, I'm not going to click on it, but yes, on the most marginalized communities. And then I talked a little bit about a little bit more around other spaces. You see a link there from the landlord's advocate. I talk about being a person of faith and parishioner at XYZ congregation and my commitment to this, and saying this bill meets the challenge. And I'm asking that you add your name as a co-sponsor. So some of the requests might be different, saying that you pass this, that you add your name as a co-sponsor, that you talk to your colleague, whatever your request is, you'll put it there. And then I'll say my name and my address so they can verify I am indeed a resident in their area. So again, the scope is, salutation, why I'm writing to you, what information I might have to contribute to why that's important, who I am a little bit more, and what I'm asking you to do. Any questions about that? I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see those. Any questions about that particular piece, the letter? Has anyone ever written a letter to your elected official? Can you raise your hand if you have? I don't even know I'm having this conversation with y'all. Like, this is amazing. So this is gonna be very easy then, right? We're gonna do, David's like, I don't know about that. Okay, so it's always good to practice. So there is a bill in Maryland. It's called House Bill 67. How many people have heard of it? Just a few folks. I'm gonna share very top level what it is. And this again, please do not do anything that is not in accordance with your own values or how you want to be tonight and anytime. So I'm not saying I need you to do this thing. I'm not forcing. Don't say that Hazel said that. Just as an example of something that's happening in your own state. So House Bill 67, the top level is essentially it's requesting what they're calling a step down program that the Commissioner of Corrections is pretty much required to provide some real support before so for two things. One, if someone is being housed in solitary confinement and being brought back into what they're calling a general population of the prison, that they get some support. That would be psychological material, like how do you integrate back into this space if you've been outside of the community for longer. I think it's longer than a month. Is it 2 months? I forget, I'll have to go back and look at it, but for a prolonged period of time, right? So if you can imagine I live by myself, and during the pandemic, I was like, I'm in this house all the time by myself. That was very hard. And I had all the resources at my disposal to, do other things, right? And I felt super isolated. I was like, first time I went outside and I saw other people, I was like, seeing monsters or something. So imagine being in a very inhumane system like the carceral system and being in solitary confinement. So the House Bill 67 is requesting that if someone's coming from solitary confinement back to general population, that they get real supports to make that transition much smoother. And if someone's coming from a carceral setting back into general society as a returning citizen, that they get those same types of supports. So instead of going straight from prison to like a halfway house and like trying to figure it out, it's like, here's how we're gonna what are the practices, what are the things that we need to actually make this transition work, so that we can, cut down on the recidivism rate, right? All of those things. So that's what the bill is requesting. Any questions, top level, about that? Cool. So there's 3 things that are possible that we're going to do right now. And we're actually not going to be in small groups. I realize the time. So we're going to give folks a chance to do your own individual work. The invitation is to do 1 of 3, 2 of 3, or 3 of 3. It is up to you and how ambitious you feel tonight. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. That link is to, excuse me, the Interfaith Action, which is an organization that has been, that sort of helps us all kind of synthesize what things are happening. Interfaith Action for Human Rights, excuse me. This has the bill. It has information, like a kind of a general letter, that link that I just shared with you, if you want to read over it, and just an opportunity to sign on, using your name and your email and mobile phone. Now, this one is general. It does not go specifically to your, like, maybe you have a different elected official than the ones that are listed here. So then this is a second option. You can write your very own letter using some level of that scaffolding and that framework to your direct elected official. So you can sign the petition. You can write a letter to your elected official today, right now, and/or invite someone else in your life to sign that letter if they're interested to write their own to their elected official. And then the third, which I'm really excited, and I hope someone does, is to write a prayer, a litany, a little song, a little jingle, something spirituality based that speaks to how you want to continue your advocacy work. So you can sign the petition, you can write a letter, you can write a jingle or a poem or a prayer or a litany. Any questions? The invitation, I know that we are 2 minutes from the top of the hour. I really want to invite you, if you are feeling called to, at the very least, today together, collectively, 22 people will sign a petition, if that is something you want to do. And the power that will be to sort of see that number go up on their website for Interfaith Action for Human Rights, to see, okay, all of these people, just like, what are they up to? Because I just got 22 people back to back. They must be in the same room. And just the power of knowing that there's support. So if at the very least, folks can do that and want to do that, we love it. And last, if there is someone who wants to write a quick prayer and offer that as our closing prayer, that would be beautiful. No pressure. I'm happy to pray us out, but I also would love to hear how other people want to pray. That's a good question, Beth. Form like individual letters have a deeper impact. They go directly to the folks' email. The petition that I've linked there does not go. What will happen is Interfaith Action for Human Rights will then present 13,000 people signed this petition. It'll be kind of more autonomous. Autonomous? Anonymous. It's 8 o'clock, whatever. Oh yeah, some people don't. Thank you, Abbott. Abbott, you're in DC, Virginia. So this is helpful. Thank you. This is really, look at God. The power then is, okay, you may not be able to write a letter to a Maryland elected official because they're gonna be like, whatever, DC person. You can sign a petition. You can invite your colleagues and your friends who live in Maryland to write a letter to sign the petition. Does that design to give pleasure paper, but I have one. Ooh. Thanks. Okay, sorry, I'm like getting distracted by the chat. Okay, does anyone want to share? Have people sign the petition, and don't feel any guilt if you haven't, but feel free to raise your hand if you have. Have you added your name to the petition? In real time, action happened. Advocacy in a real tangible way happened. Thank you for sharing that also, Beth. Awesome. We'll include some resources on the back end too. Is anyone interested in writing, like handwriting your own letter, typing your own letter to your elected official? Hollis, yeah, thank you. Did anyone take a go at a prayer or a litany? Hollis again, all right. Wonderful. Well, I know that we are up at time. I'm happy to stay on if folks have questions or want to continue discussion. Top level things that I want you to take away is that advocacy is accessible. It is something that you can do And there are lots of ways to do it. You can give of your time, you can give of your talent, and you can give of your treasure, as we say in the Episcopal context. And it can be as simple as signing something, it could be a writing. And when we're not in this COVID moment, there are also really cool opportunities to show up to your elected official's office. One of my favorite things to do. That is your office. That's what I said, but that is your office. They work for you, remember that. If you have any questions and you're not able to stay, my email is in the chat in 2 moments. There it is, Hazel H. Monae at edow.org. And I think that's it. Ed?
Okay, thank you so much, Hazel. You've been very generous with your time and talent and considerable knowledge, and we're all the better for it. And to everyone who showed up this evening, we greatly appreciate you too. And I do want to remind you of a statement I made beforehand. We're viewing this thing as a opening of a dialogue, and we will be sharing Hazel's slides. She has some other materials that she told me about that I'm excited for one to see. And so we'll be distributing that. And you can stay in touch with the committee simply by responding to the email address that will be there. And then we'll include in the body of the text Hazel's email and probably a couple of other fun things too. So by all means, we encourage you to be very strong advocates. But before we go, the main reason why we're all here is we are united in faith. And I would like to turn it over to Reverend Beth O'Callahan for a closing prayer this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let us pray. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving spirit may so move every human heart, that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatred cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live and work for justice and peace. And thank you for this time together and for the witness and knowledge that has been imparted by Hazel and this committee which has brought us together. We ask this all through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much. And one last thing, I have a little flyer right here, and we're going to give you a real-time opportunity very soon to put what you've learned this evening to work. We're having as a guest on April 7th, 7 to 8 p.m. via this very Zoom channel, Congressman David Trone of the 6th District of Maryland. And he represents, I'm not everyone here for sure, but probably 80% of us. And it's your opportunity to bend his ear, and I greatly encourage you to do so. Hazel, you can come back too, even though he's obviously, well, you don't have a real congressperson, but that's a whole nother story. So for another day. So take care.
Oh, thank you all so much.
Yes, and thank you for everyone for attending Becoming an Advocate for Social Justice in Voice and Spirit, brought to you by the Gaithersburg Episcopal Church of the Ascension and its Equity and Justice Committee. Have a wonderful evening and a safe evening.
Thank you.